So I'm not going to talk about Blitz.js, sorry about that, but I hope this talk will be also interesting for you. So I'm going to talk about competition in which you are building games in 13 kilobytes and some lessons learned, not only for game developers but also front-end developers, since most of the participants of the competition are working as front-end developers and then are building games in their free time. So a little background, I'm building games. I've started the Enclave Games Studio. I'm running the JS13K Games competition. And there's also the Game Dev JS community. We have meetups. There's also a Game Dev JS weekly newsletter. And the JS13K Games competition, anyone heard about it before the talk? Oh, whoa, that's nice. So it's a competition happening since 2012, every year, online, between August 13th and September 13th. So you have a whole month to build the game in 13 kilobytes, a zip package. So that's 50, 60 kilobytes of unpacked code. So that's rather small, but not that small, I would say. And the competition runs for a decade now. And we had the very first results presented at the on Game Standard conference, which was 2012. Interestingly enough, it was the exact same year that I was speaking at Meet.js Summit. Obviously, this picture was taken by a calculator, but that was me. Some of you could have noticed this picture in Zbyszek's slides. And I was giving a talk there, and please don't watch it, because it's the classic case of what not to do when delivering a presentation. But it happened. There's a recording of it. I can't erase it. So it was also the year that, more or less the year that I started the Enclave Games Studio, which is basically me as a programmer and my wife as a graphic designer, and we are not hiring. And the second, thank you. The second thing to mention, there are no QR codes in the slides. Thank you. So why would you participate in such a competition? For fun, to challenge yourself. This is quite an interesting competition in which you can't just use your usual game framework, if you use one, or any common framework, because you have to squeeze it into 13 kilobytes. So that is quite a challenge on itself. You can grow your skills. You have to work with what you have, maybe some tiny frameworks, maybe not using any frameworks at all. You can meet new friends. There are stories of people being hired by companies, then representing them in the competition, teaming up, starting companies, releasing products, earning millions of dollars, which is really cool. You can win cool prizes. There's a whole lot of cool prizes to be won, software licenses, some hardware prizes. We are also sending t-shirts. Every design, every year, we ship the t-shirts to top 100 participants for free. If you're living in Australia or the North Pole, you will get t-shirts for free. So that's also cool. So on the competition website, you can see those small screenshots of games, which are like 400 pixels per 250. And they almost always are bigger than the games themselves. So this small screenshot of the game is like 20-something kilobytes. So it's bigger than this game, which is Quake 1 Tribute, in which you have levels, weapons, enemies, sounds, music, different music tracks for different levels, and all of that packed in 13 kilobytes. So over the years, since the competition is running since 2012, and the recent ones ended literally 3 days ago. We got almost 2,000 entries and like a few thousand of developers that learned a lot throughout the years. And we can try to learn from that. So one thing I didn't mention earlier is that all the games submitted to the competition, so the requirement to participating is not only sending the compressed minified zip, but also submitting a source code on GitHub. So every single game from all the years are not only playable on the website, you can also see a source code of every single game submitted to the competition and see how it was built, which I think is really cool. Plus, there are also postmortems which authors are writing, in which they are explaining all the technical details of building the game. So for example, the postmortem of the Quake game, that's literally a ton of knowledge, how the author did the textures, maps, everything else. It's like a huge knowledge base of how to play with JavaScript in a browser. So the competition runs for a month. So it's not like you have to sit somewhere for 48 hours, don't sleep, drink only energy drinks, and eat pizza. You can normally participate. You can even go on like 2 weeks vacations, get back and still participate. And an interesting case is that if you know how to properly prepare to the competition, the size constraint is not that big of a problem. Usually it's time, even though you have a whole month. It's like trying to optimize things, and many times the packages are not even 13 kilobytes, but lower. So that's kind of interesting if you look at on the outside. So 13 kilobytes is kind of a lot if you think about it, since you can't obviously squeeze big images or MP3s. But if you approach this with like procedural generation, etc., which I will be explaining, then there is a high chance you can build something easily for the competition. So I like the saying that limitations spawn creativity. And I think the competition got kind of popular over the years because of the 13 kilobyte limitation. This is more like a fun fact than anything useful. This section is, don't use this at home or at office. But there are interesting cases, like interesting things you can learn by participating. So those are specifically from entries submitted to the competition. So for example, all the tags in HTML, like almost all of them, are optional. You don't need to have head, you don't need to have body, you don't need to have title, and the document will be processed. You can have style, you can have canvas to render stuff, you can have script to launch JavaScript, and that's it. This is totally valid, well, not valid, but like document that will be executed and it will work. Instead of loading external images, you can save them as base64 text. This will save a lot of size because all the images have some extra data. With this, it's like just loading a text. Level data, commas are optional. You don't need to put commas, you don't need to put zeros. This is totally valid level data that was used in a game. You can generate sounds. You don't need sound files. This is the complete line of code which will generate some specific sound in your game that will sound like something specific, like collecting a coin or something like that. It's not minified, it's not like truncated, that's all. And procedural content generation, all the things. with the right approach, with the approach of generating stuff, you can produce a lot of content for the game. You don't need to do this writing from scratch. There are many tools, even though you are limited in size, the output. There are many tools that you can look into. Since 2012 or 13, we had the resources page. So right now it's like huge. And there are so many tools, great tools to be used for like literally all the things you want to build. So you can have a specific setup with like contra micro library, which gives you the basic loop and other things. You can create your artwork with Pico, have sound effects, have music, use minification, and then squeeze everything into 13 kilobytes. And some extremes that we had in the competition, like you can, since you need bytes, math.p sounds like a long thing. You can replace it with a variable called p, and it will work. All the HTML tags are optional, specifically the ending ones, but the starting ones you can also omit if you like. String constants, you can shorten them. Images can be loaded from the base 64 I showed you. And my favorite thing from all the years was a case in which someone was missing one byte. And what they did was removing the space in the game over message. So it fit perfectly into 13 kilobytes. Okay, but this is kind of about games, but most of you are front-end developers. But things people learned participating in JS13K Games competition, I kind of also learned and applied running enclave games, and many developers participating in JS13K who are front-end developers are also learned a lot. So there are many findings in the postmortems blog posts, but I'd like to compress all of that knowledge, all of those almost 2,000 games, and take all the things that maybe will be interesting for you. And I think that's the biggest problem with developers in general when they don't know what they know and they think that they can build another MMORPG but better. And it happened to a lot of developers that I know. That, oh, World of Warcraft is nice, but it's missing something, and so let's write a better one. And they hide in the basement for 5 years, and after 5 years they have literally nothing working. And that's definitely not a good approach. And I think it's quite important to lower the scope, especially if we are not sure how much time things will take. Something quite important in the competition is that whoever have the working prototype ready as soon as possible, that's a great position to then iterate over it, to show it to others, to have a backup if some new feature won't work. So I think that's kind of crucial. As soon as possible, build a working prototype. So you can show it, you can test if your idea works. There's literally no point in trying to build something complex in 29 days and realizing after that it's still not working or it's not working as you would like this to work. So prototype is kind of important at the very beginning so you can work on that. Have no fear of perfection, you'll never reach it. That's something I learned the hard way. I was building my first game around 2010, 11, first serious game, let's say, because I was experimenting with JavaScript with jQuery, for example. I built Snake in jQuery, but that's like ancient times. But Wizard Quest was the first serious game that I wanted to build, and I wanted it to be perfect to a point that I was rewriting it from scratch 7 times with different tools, with different approaches, etc. So I realized that it makes no sense to put so much pressure on having the very first game perfect. So then I realized that instead of trying to make that perfect thing, I have to build something. I have to build this thing and release it and see what happens. So I actually built like super simple game where you fly in a spaceship, avoid asteroids, and that's it. You're basically not even shooting at them. And I went through all the cycle of like releasing the game, released it, and apparently it was 2013-ish. So there was literally like 50 HTML5 games in the world. So it wasn't that difficult. But then automatically I got invited to conferences to tell people how to build web games because I built one. Even though it was like really shitty something avoiding asteroids and that's it. But it worked. It was a released game. So that was kind of a valuable lesson to release stuff and go through all the cycle and have something that you can show. So one of the things I needed was to realize that I'm not that good that I thought I am. And that Wizard Quest game, that one I was rewriting 7 times from scratch, I wasn't ready for that. Like, this was my perfect project, and I didn't have the capabilities to build it. So in the next couple of years, I was building games like the Captain Rogers, the one avoiding asteroids, but with different features that were in Wizard Quest. And after those 5, 6, 7 years, when I got to that point in which I had all the ideas, all the code to make Wizard Quest. I built it in like, I don't know, a month or 2. Because I already knew all the ingredients. I already know how to do it. So you know some things, you know things that you want to learn, but there are so many things you had absolutely no idea, you don't know about, that would be useful for you, that it's incredible that we like close ourselves and think that, okay, I just sit there and code and it will work. But it's really a long journey, and we have so much to learn, that things that we had no idea existed when we started. So you definitely have a plan. You need to have a plan if you want to build something, because like those guys trying to build an MMO RPG, they were like, okay, I feel like building the equipment system. Let's try building this and see what happens. So it was like throwing ideas, seeing that some things work, some things don't work. So you definitely need some kind of vision of what you want to build and like remove all the unnecessary stuff. And if you keep things simple, it should be okay. If you overcomplicate things, then you're not gonna release anything. So it's kind of important to build that first prototype, iterate over it, add some features, see if they work. If they don't work, you have a save point, and you can return to that and experiment with something else. So it's kind of important to remove all the features, all the things that you don't need critically right now. You can push to the 2.0 version. So it could be things that you can do later. So actually the shooting in Captain Rogers 2.0 was added as a feature and it worked perfectly fine, but it wasn't needed in the very first version. And it's kind of important to not hide in the basement for 5 years or 3 years or whatever. Because when you work in the public, when you show your code, where you show your progress, that's where magic happens. All the participants that, it's kind of cliche, but if they use the hashtag of the competition and share the progress, then they get feedback, they have gameplays of other devs and players. And usually those entries are higher than usual, I would say. They are better tested, better played, better prepared for the competition. So it's kind of important to be open to feedback. You don't have to apply all the feedback that you are getting, but if something is being repeated by 2, 3, or 5 people, that is something that you should definitely consider. Test all the things if it's possible. There are so many different setups, different devices, different browsers that you should test for that. Showing a playable demo and asking folks to play it, and then playing their games instead as well. It's kind of important. So testing. And I'm not a procrastinator. I just prefer doing all my work in a deadline-induced panic. So deadline is kind of important because it's like we have our dream projects that last for decades because it have to be perfect, but there's literally no deadline. So if the competition has a literal deadline, you have to cut features, you have to finish stuff, you have to remove things to fit in the size limitation. And it could be ugly, but if it kind of works, that's perfectly fine. And you experienced releasing a product, going through all the cycle, you can put it on your website, hey, I'm a game developer. So it's kind of important to focus on this. Nobody is going to do that for you, so it's really up to you. You just have to get it done. And if you have some extra time, you can juice it, you can add some features, fancy animations, but it's only when you have a working prototype, all the features you wanted, all the unnecessary features thrown away, you can try to improve what you have. So to summarize, if you take 3 things from this presentation, first would be keep it simple. Because then everything else will work. The second one is keep it simple, and the third one is keep it simple. And thank you.
Raz, dwa.
Any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Andrzej. There is only one. Why 13K?
So there's literal answer on the website saying why not. I don't know if we have time for like 2-minute explanation of why it actually is 13K.
Yeah, do answer the question and then let's wrap up.
Okay, so the competition started in 2012. There was like no game jams and like literal maybe 2 or 3 front-end competitions in which anyone remembers a list apart? It was a website with interesting front-end articles, and they had a competition, build a website in 10 kilobytes, and it got kind of popular. There was also the JS 1K competition in which you were building any JavaScript experience in 1 kilobyte. So I was like, okay, 1 kilobyte is definitely not enough. 10K sounds interesting, but there was like literally already 2 or 3 front-end competitions with 10 kilobytes. So I was like, okay, so why not 13 maybe? Because 5 would be still too, not that much. 15 maybe. 13 sounds interesting. So it literally started everything for the competition like, okay, so assuming it's 13. So the competition starts on August 13th. and ends on September 13th. The first theme was bad luck. And apparently the combination of like limited space and this bad luck theme kind of worked and got people interested, and the rest is history.
Well, thank you.